The warehouse was dark. Three armed men stood over a blindfolded woman worth $1 billion. Then the door creaked open, and a man in grease-stained work clothes walked in alone. One of the mercenaries laughed. "You've got 15 seconds, maintenance man." He had no idea those 15 seconds would be the last thing he'd ever underestimate. If you're new here, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell, because this channel is where ordinary people do the extraordinary, and stories like this one don't come along twice. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now sit back, because part 1 starts right now. And trust me, you don't want to miss a single word. The boiler in sub-basement 2 had been making that sound again. Logan Mercer crouched beside the aging unit with a flashlight clenched between his teeth and a wrench in his right hand, listening to it knock and rattle the way it always did on cold mornings when the pressure valve got stubborn. He'd reported it twice. Filed the maintenance ticket both times through the proper digital system, the way the new HR protocols required. Both tickets had been automatically reassigned to a third-party vendor review that, as far as Logan could tell, existed only as a line item in somebody's budget spreadsheet. So he fixed it himself, like he always did. He adjusted the valve, tapped the housing twice with the flat of his palm, not because it helped mechanically, but because sometimes old equipment just needed to know you were paying attention, and the knocking settled into a low, steady hum. "There you go," he said quietly, to nobody. He was good at talking to nobody. He'd had years of practice. Logan stood, rolled his shoulders, and caught his own reflection in the polished surface of a nearby pipe. 32 years old, and the face that looked back at him had lived considerably more than that. The jaw was sharp under 2 days of stubble. The eyes were a calm, flat gray. The kind of eyes that processed a room before the rest of the face had time to react. There was a scar along his left jawline, thin and pale now, barely visible unless the light caught it right. Most people who noticed it assumed construction accident or maybe a bar fight. Nobody assumed what it actually was. He didn't correct them. Logan unclipped the radio from his belt. "Sub-2 boiler is stable. Pressure's reading normal." A crackle of static. Then the voice of Dale, the overnight facilities coordinator, a 60-year-old man who ran the maintenance department with the chaotic energy of someone who had given up on systems but refused to give up on people. "Copy that, Mercer. You're a miracle worker. You know Henderson from the third-floor HVAC team put in a 2-week-out service request for that same unit?" "Yeah, I know." "You could have just let it sit. It was making noise." A pause. "Logan, buddy, you are aware you get paid the same whether the boiler gets fixed tonight or 2 weeks from now, right?" "The night security team works down here until 4 a.m., Dale. It was cold." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Get some sleep, man." Logan clipped the radio back to his belt, picked up his toolbox, and walked toward the elevator. Apex Sentinel Technologies occupied 14 floors of a glass and steel tower on the north side of Chicago's financial district, the kind of building that made a specific kind of statement. Not wealth, exactly. Power. The subtle, quiet kind that didn't need to shout because it had already arranged for other people to do the shouting on its behalf. The company built security infrastructure, surveillance systems, threat detection networks, encrypted communications architecture, for private corporations and, increasingly, for government agencies. Defense contracts. The kind that came with classified briefings and ND. As thick enough to use as doorstops. Logan had been working here for 4 years. He had applied for the maintenance technician position because it paid well, had benefits, and, critically, required no background check deeper than a standard employment screen. His military service record was a matter of public fact. What he'd done during that service was considerably less public, and Logan preferred to keep it that way. He was good at this job. He showed up on time, knew every system in the building better than the engineers who'd installed them, and never made problems for anyone. His supervisor, a tired but decent man named Carl Briggs, had quietly given him 3 merit increases over 4 years without ever once explaining why. Logan hadn't asked. He stepped off the elevator on the ground floor, badged out, and pushed through the glass doors into the Chicago cold. The city at 2 a.m. had its own specific texture. The distant sound of traffic on the expressway, the orange-white glow of streetlights catching the exhaust from manhole covers, the particular silence of a city that hadn't gone to sleep so much as shifted into a lower register. He walked 3 blocks to his car, a 9-year-old Jeep Grand Cherokee with a crack in the rear bumper and 140,000 miles on it, and sat in the driver's seat for a moment without starting the engine. On the passenger seat, a drawing. His daughter, Maya, was 7 years old and had her mother's dark hair and his stubborn jaw and a talent for drawing horses that was, by any objective measure, completely disproportionate to her age. She'd left the drawing on his seat before he dropped her at his sister's house that afternoon. A horse running across a field, the sun sketched in the corner with radiating lines the way kids draw suns, the whole thing in purple and green because those were, according to Maya, the best colors. At the bottom, in careful, deliberate letters, "For Daddy when he gets home." Logan looked at it for a long moment. Then he started the car. Fun. He picked Maya up at 7:30 the next morning, made her scrambled eggs with exactly the right amount of cheese, which was a lot of cheese. They had reached a formal agreement on this. Drove her to school and listened to her talk for the entire 12-minute commute about a disagreement she was having with a girl named Brianna over who had correctly identified the capital of Australia in a classroom quiz. "It's Canberra," Maya said, with the calm certainty of someone who had consulted multiple sources. "Not Sydney. Everybody thinks it's Sydney. I don't know why everybody thinks it's Sydney." "People make assumptions," Logan said. "Well, they shouldn't." "No," he agreed. "They shouldn't." He walked her to the school entrance, crouched down so they were at the same level. She had her backpack on and her hair in 2 uneven pigtails that Logan had attempted and she had tolerated without comment, which was its own kind of grace. "Good day?" he said. "Trying to have one," she said, which was something Logan said to her, and hearing it come back at him in her matter-of-fact 7-year-old voice did something complicated to the center of his chest. "That's all we can do." She hugged him, the fierce, sudden kind, both arms locked around his neck, and then was gone through the doors before he could say anything else. He stood in the cold for a second longer than necessary. Then he went to work. The trouble started, as trouble at Apex Sentinel Technologies almost always started, on the 7th floor. The 7th floor was where the company's internal security operations team lived, a group of 12 people whose job was to monitor the physical and digital security of the building and its systems. Logan spent a lot of time on the 7th floor because the HVAC ducting ran through a service corridor that required monthly maintenance, and because 2 of the 12 people on the security team had a habit of propping open the server room door with a rubber doorstop when they thought nobody was looking, which created a temperature variance that threw off the humidity sensors, which triggered false alerts, which drove Dale in facilities absolutely insane. He had fixed this particular problem 4 times. He was fixing it for the 5th time on a Wednesday morning when he noticed the camera. It wasn't one of Apex's cameras. He knew every camera in this building, their positions, their coverage angles, their maintenance schedules. He knew which ones had been upgraded 18 months ago and which ones were still running on firmware from the original installation. He knew the blind spots, the corner behind the east stairwell door, the 3-foot gap in coverage between camera 14 and camera 15 in the parking structure, the odd dead angle on the 7th floor corridor where the ceiling dropped 2 inches for a structural beam. The device he found tucked behind a ventilation panel was small, barely larger than a pack of matches, and it was pointed directly at the server room entrance. It was not an Apex Sentinel camera. He didn't touch it. He crouched there in the service corridor for a full 30 seconds, looking at it without touching it, and thought carefully about what this meant. Then he went and found Carl Briggs. Carl's office was a converted storage room off the main facilities hub, barely large enough for a desk and a filing cabinet, and the persistent smell of the coffee Carl made with a machine that should have been replaced 3 years ago. He was a man of perhaps 55, with a gray mustache and the patient, slightly exhausted expression of someone who had seen enough corporate nonsense to be surprised by nothing and troubled by most of it. "I need to report something through the formal security channel," Logan said, standing in the doorway. "Not facilities, security." Carl looked up from his computer, looked at Logan's face, put his coffee down. "Okay," he said. "Talk." Logan described what he'd found. Carl listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Logan had come to respect about him. When Logan finished, Carl was quiet for a moment, then picked up his phone and called the 7th floor security team directly. The security team sent a supervisor named Graham, who arrived 20 minutes later, looked at the device for approximately 45 seconds, and said, "It's probably one of the contractor units. We've had some third-party vendors doing surveys this month." "That's not a survey device," Logan said. Graham looked at him the way people often looked at Logan in professional settings. The particular expression that meant you are a maintenance technician and I am a supervisor, and this conversation has an obvious hierarchy that you seem to be misreading. "I appreciate the flag," he said, which was the professional equivalent of, "We're done here." Logan went back downstairs. He spent the next 3 hours doing his regular work, a pressure check on the 4th floor plumbing, a burned-out ballast in the 2nd floor electrical panel, a badge reader on the 6th floor that had started intermittently rejecting valid credentials. And while he worked, he thought, whoa. By the end of his shift, he had filed a formal written incident report through Apex's internal security system, documenting the device's location, dimensions, apparent design, and the specific reason it was not consistent with standard third-party survey equipment. He used precise language. He included a hand-drawn diagram of the installation location with measurements. He cited the specific section of the company's internal security policy that required unauthorized surveillance equipment to be reported and quarantined pending investigation. It took him 40 minutes to write. He proofread it twice. 2 days later, he received an automated system response. Report received. Under review. Expected response timeline, 5 to 7 business days. Logan read this notification standing at the kitchen counter while Maya ate cereal across the breakfast table, explaining, with considerable passion, a documentary she'd watched about how dolphins communicate. He set his phone face down on the counter. "Do dolphins actually have names?" he asked her. "Kind of," she said. "They have signature whistles. It's like a name, but it sounds cooler." "That does sound cooler." "Everything about dolphins is cooler," she said, with the unassailable confidence of a 7-year-old who had done her research. He poured himself coffee, stood at the window for a moment, and looked out at the neighborhood coming awake in the morning. 5 to 7 business days. There were 3 more devices. He'd found them over the past 48 hours during his normal maintenance rounds, in locations that suggested careful, patient, professional placement. Not random, not contractor surveys. Someone had mapped this building and chosen their positions deliberately, and whoever had done it knew the building's camera coverage well enough to operate entirely in the gaps. That required either a significant investment in reconnaissance or access to Apex's own security schematics. Logan drank his coffee. "Dad?" Maya said. "Are you listening?" "Signature whistles," he said. "I'm listening." She squinted at him. "You're doing the face." "What face?" "The one where you're thinking about something else but trying not to look like it." He turned from the window and looked at her directly. 7 years old, and she could read him better than most trained intelligence analysts he'd worked with. "Sorry," he said. "Tell me about the whistles." She told him about the whistles. He listened. Really listened, not the surface kind. And for the next 20 minutes, he let the rest of it be quiet. But he didn't forget it. The formal security review meeting happened on a Thursday afternoon, 9 days after Logan's initial report. He wasn't invited. He found out about it afterward from a junior member of the security team named Priya, who was 24 years old, 3 months into her first corporate job, and still operated under the apparently radical belief that things that were wrong should be made right. She found him in the sub-basement service corridor. "They reviewed your report," she said, without preamble, "in the senior security meeting this morning." Logan kept his eyes on the junction box he was working on. "And?" Victor Hale was there. He said the devices were part of an authorized vendor security assessment that wasn't properly logged. He said it was an administrative oversight. "Victor Hale runs business development," Logan said. "I know. He doesn't have authority over security operations." "I know that too." Priya paused. "He seemed to know a lot about the devices, though. He had the vendor documentation ready before anyone asked for it." Logan set down his screwdriver, turned and looked at her. "You're telling me this why?" She shifted, straightened. "Because I looked up the vendor on the documentation. The company doesn't have an active business license in Illinois. They registered 4 months ago, made no public filings, and their listed address is a mail forwarding service in Schaumburg. The service corridor was very quiet. Okay, Logan said after a moment. Did you put that in writing? I tried to. My supervisor told me to let it go. She paused again. He said it wasn't our job to audit vendor credentials. Logan picked his screwdriver back up. What's your name? Priya Nair. Priya Nair, he repeated, like he was filing it. Be careful about what you say, and to who for the next couple of weeks. She blinked. Is that supposed to be reassuring? No, he said honestly. She stared at him, nodded once, stiffly, and left the corridor. Logan finished the junction box. Then he sat on the floor of the service corridor for a while with the lights humming overhead, and he thought about a very specific category of problem. The category was things that are being deliberately ignored by people who should be paying attention. He'd encountered this category before, in a different context, in a different life. He knew what it looked like. He knew what it became when you left it alone long enough. The security devices weren't the problem. They were the preparation. Somebody was getting ready to do something to this company or to someone in it, and they had help on the inside. Logan filed a second report, more detailed this time. He included Priya's information about the vendor, framed as an independent observation rather than attributing it to her. He escalated the report to the next tier in Apex's internal system, which sent it, per policy, to the Executive Security Committee. The Executive Security Committee had 3 members. One of them was Victor Hale. Logan figured the odds on that report getting a fair review, and they weren't good. But he filed it anyway, because the right thing and the effective thing weren't always the same thing, and sometimes you did the right thing even when you knew it would probably accomplish nothing, because the alternative was doing nothing, and that was a decision too. He was very familiar with what that decision cost. The gala was announced on a Friday morning company-wide email. Apex Sentinel Technologies, Strategic Partners. Reception. Next Saturday. Ballroom level, the Meridian, Chicago. Black tie optional. Logan read the announcement during his lunch break, sitting on a loading dock with a sandwich he'd made at 6 a.m. A billion-dollar defense contract had apparently entered its final evaluation phase. The reception was for the government representatives, technology partners, and board members involved in the decision. It was, the email noted with corporate understatement, a significant milestone for the company. He read it twice. Then he looked at the event security protocols attached to the bottom of the email, the standard procedures for company-organized events at external venues. The protocols were thorough, professional, and 3 years out of date. They didn't account for the specific configuration of the Meridian's event-level security infrastructure. The camera blind spots he happened to know about because the Meridian used a Sentinel-7 monitoring system that Apex had serviced twice, both times with Logan on the crew. They also didn't account for the possibility that someone who already had access to Apex's security schematics and had spent several weeks quietly placing surveillance equipment throughout the company's own building might have a very specific reason to want a room full of executives, board members, and defense contractors in one place at one time. Logan balled up his sandwich wrapper, tossed it in the recycling. He pulled out his phone and looked at it for a long moment. He thought about Priya Nair, about the shadow company in Schaumburg with the mail forwarding address, about Victor Hale and the vendor documentation produced with suspicious speed, about the 4 surveillance devices pointing at access points and server room entries. He thought about how much he did not want to be the person he was about to become, even temporarily, even for a good reason. Then he thought about Maya and the drawing of the horse in purple and green and the word for daddy at the bottom. He thought about how a quiet life was not the same thing as a safe one. Logan put his phone in his pocket, picked up his toolbox, and went back inside the building. He needed to find out what Victor Hale was really planning, and he needed to do it before Saturday. Awesome. 3 days later, he would have his answer. It would be worse than he thought. The 3 days between Logan's decision and Saturday arrived and passed the way trouble always did. Faster than you expected, slower than you feared, and with a particular quality of dread that sat low in the stomach like something swallowed wrong. He spent those days doing his job, He fixed things. He filed work orders. He ate lunch on the loading dock and picked Maya up from school and helped her build a model of the solar system out of foam balls and wooden skewers on the kitchen table. And when she asked why Pluto wasn't a planet anymore, he said, politics. And she looked at him with profound suspicion, and he said, science. And she accepted this, but barely. At night, after she was asleep, he sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down everything he knew. Not everything he suspected. What he actually knew, documented, could point to. It wasn't enough to stop anything. But it was enough to understand the shape of it. The surveillance devices, 4 of them, positioned at the server room entrance, the executive elevator bank, the primary data access terminal on the 9th floor, and the emergency stairwell that connected the executive suites to the parking structure, weren't monitoring the building in real time. He'd realized this on the second day when he'd gone back and looked more carefully without touching them. They were recording, storing. The kind of setup you used when you were building documentation, mapping patterns, learning who went where and when. Someone had been studying this building for weeks, possibly months, learning the rhythms of it, the routines of the people inside it. That was not the behavior of someone planning a simple theft. That was the behavior of someone planning around people specifically. Victor Hale's name appeared in Logan's notes 17 times by Thursday night, each appearance connected to a documented fact, the vendor documentation that appeared too fast, the security review meeting Logan hadn't been invited to, a financial authorization from 6 weeks ago that Carl Briggs had mentioned in passing, a facilities budget amendment that had redirected a portion of the building's physical security upgrade funds to strategic technology assessment. Carl had mentioned it the way people mention administrative annoyances, not the way people mention evidence, but Logan had written it down anyway. He also wrote down a name he hadn't heard before Thursday. Natalie Pierce. He'd seen her in the hallway outside the executive suites on the 9th floor, a woman of perhaps 35 in a gray blazer, carrying a leather document case, and walking with the specific purposeful quality of someone who was both in a hurry and trying not to appear to be. He'd been there to service a badge reader. She'd glanced at him, glanced at his maintenance badge, glanced away. Normal. Except that her eyes had gone to the badge reader he was servicing and stayed there half a second longer than casual interest explained, and when she'd pushed through the stairwell door, she'd looked back once. He'd asked Dale about her the next morning, casual as he could make it. Compliance Division, Dale said, with the mild distaste that the facilities department reserved for any department whose work generated paperwork for everyone else. She's been here about 3 weeks. Contract position? Some kind of internal audit. Financial audit? Who knows? Those people never explain themselves. Dale paused. Why? Badge reader on 9 is acting up again, trying to figure out if it's a credential issue or a hardware issue. It's always a hardware issue, Dale said, with the weary certainty of a man who had made peace with impermanence. Everything in this building is a hardware issue. Logan filed that too. 3 weeks. A compliance investigator who arrived 3 weeks ago, right around the same time the surveillance devices started appearing. Either that was a coincidence or someone inside the company had triggered an investigation that someone else, maybe Victor Hale, maybe others, was working very hard to close before it produced results. He thought about going to Natalie Pierce directly. He thought about it for a long time, sitting at the kitchen table with cold coffee at 11:30 Thursday night, and he decided against it. Not because the idea was wrong, because the timing was wrong. If she was already investigating and someone was already watching, making contact could compromise whatever she was building and put her in a position she didn't know she was in yet. So he left it alone. He was still learning how to do that, leave things alone that he couldn't yet fix. He'd gotten better at it over 4 years of civilian life, but it was the kind of skill that never fully settled, like a healed bone that still ached before rain. He called his sister Rachel on Friday evening while Maya was in the bath. "Can she stay with you Saturday night?" he said. "I've got a work thing that might run late." Rachel, who had known Logan for 32 years and had learned to read the particular register of understatement he used when something was wrong, said, "How late?" "Not sure." "Logan." "I know. Are you okay?" He looked at the bathroom door where he could hear Maya singing something to herself, off-key and enthusiastic. "Yeah," he said. I just want to make sure she's with you. A pause. Okay, Rachel said. She can stay. Tell her it's a sleepover. Make it fun. She's 7. Everything is fun. Another pause. Call me when you're done with whatever you're not telling me about. I will. He stood in the hallway for a moment after hanging up, his hand still on the phone. Then he went and sat on the bathroom floor outside the tub and listened to Maya sing badly about dolphins until she was done. And he helped her dry her hair, and they watched half a movie on the couch before she fell asleep leaning against his arm. He sat there without moving for a long time, her weight against him, the TV going quiet, the city doing its city things outside the window. He thought, I just want this. This specific thing. Is that so much? He knew it wasn't a question he was going to get an answer to tonight. The gala was tomorrow. The Meridian Chicago sat on Michigan Avenue like it had always been there and always would be. The kind of hotel that understood that old money doesn't announce itself and new money tries too hard. And the sweet spot is a lobby that makes you feel, without quite being able to explain why, that arriving here was the appropriate outcome of a life well lived. Logan arrived at 4 in the afternoon, 6 hours before the reception was scheduled to begin, wearing a slightly nicer version of his usual maintenance outfit, clean work pants, a gray-collared shirt with the Apex Sentinel logo, his tool bag over one shoulder. He had a legitimate reason to be here. Apex's event support team had submitted a facilities request to have their maintenance tech check the AV system integration before the reception, since 3 of the presentation screens in the ballroom level were running Apex-installed software. The request was in the system. It was legitimate. He'd made sure of that on Thursday. What the request didn't mention was everything else he intended to do while he was there. He spent the first hour doing the actual AV work, because that came first and because doing it right meant he'd have a credible reason to move through every room on the ballroom level without raising questions. He checked the screens, ran diagnostics, made one small adjustment to the wireless signal repeater, and documented all of it in the work order app on his phone. He spent the second hour finding the things he'd already known, from memory, from the 2 site visits he'd done here 18 months ago, and confirming what was different. 3 things were different. The first was a small transmitter mounted inside a decorative panel near the main ballroom entrance. Different hardware from what he'd found at Apex, but the same general design philosophy. Recording, not broadcasting. Whoever had installed it had done it recently. The adhesive was still slightly tacky. The second was a service entrance on the north side of the building. A loading dock access door that should have required a key card and PIN, that had been shimmied, not broken. Shimmied. Someone had placed a thin strip of hardened plastic inside the latch housing that prevented the bolt from fully seating, so the door would appear locked from any monitoring system that tracked electronic status, while physically being pushable open from outside. The third was the fire exit stairwell on the east end of the ballroom level, which normally self-locked from the outside. The magnetic lock mechanism had been manually disengaged and re-engaged in a way that left it physically unlocked while still showing as active on the panel. 3 ways in, off the camera system, off the electronic access log. Logan stood in the east stairwell for a full minute, alone, looking at the disabled lock mechanism. He'd been wrong about the shape of it. He'd been thinking financial crime, corporate espionage, data theft, something that happened in the dark, quietly, that you found out about afterwards. This was none of those things. This was a kidnapping plan. He could see it clearly now. The way you can see a shape in a dark room once your eyes have fully adjusted. Not gradually, but all at once. A sudden and total understanding of what you're looking at. Someone was going to be taken from this event tonight. The surveillance at Apex had been target selection and routine mapping. The devices here were for coordination. The 3 access points were extraction routes. And whoever was coming through those doors wasn't going to be deterred by a report filed in a system that Victor Hale had access to. Logan went back to the service corridor, sat on a metal folding chair that someone had left against the wall, and made a decision. He made it the way he'd made decisions in a previous life. Not by talking himself into it, or talking himself out of it, but by letting the situation tell him what it required and then agreeing to do that. What it required was, stay. He texted Dale. AV issues more complex than expected. Going to stay on site through the event to monitor. Billing event support rate. Dale texted back a thumbs up emoji and nothing else, which was everything Logan needed. Then he settled in to watch. The guests started arriving at 8:30. Logan moved through the perimeter of the ballroom level in his maintenance clothes, invisible in the way that people who do physical work in expensive spaces are always invisible, present, necessary, noticed only when something needed fixing. He watched the room fill. Defense contractors in dark suits. Board members with the particular ease of people who had been rich long enough that it had become structural, part of how they stood and listened and took up space. Government representatives identifiable by the way they watched the room back. Occupational habit. PR people circling. Catering staff with practiced efficiency. And then Evelyn Brooks walked in. He'd seen her before, in company-wide video calls and in the lobby twice, but seeing her in person carried a different quality. She was 30 years old, which was younger than she photographed, and she had the composed, slightly walled-off presence of someone who had spent a decade being the youngest person in every room she walked into and had developed a specific kind of armor for it. She wore a dark green dress that managed to be elegant without announcing itself. Her hair was up. She was talking to a man from the board as she entered, and she was listening to him the way she always listened in the calls. Fully attentive, but with her eyes doing a separate assessment of the room at the same time. Like she was running two processes simultaneously. She was also, Logan noted, not flanked by any personal security. There were two contracted event security officers near the main entrance. Standard posture, standard awareness level. There was nobody specifically watching her. That was wrong. Given what her company was doing, given the scale of the contract in play, given what he now knew about the preparation that had gone into tonight, that was very, very wrong. He spent the next 40 minutes close to the perimeter of the room, moving with purpose when he moved, and standing still when stillness was called for. He mapped the positions of everyone on the ballroom level. He tracked the event security officers. He noted the location of Victor Hale, who arrived at 9 and immediately found a cluster of defense contractors to talk to, one hand in his pocket, laughing at something, perfectly at ease. Too at ease. Logan knew what tension looked like in a person who was suppressing it. He knew the specific quality of control that took. Victor was carrying something tonight, something that wanted to show in his shoulders and his jaw and the way his eyes moved every few minutes toward the main entrance, and he was working very hard to keep it from showing. Not hard enough. At 9:47, Logan found the fourth device. This one in the ceiling of the service corridor that ran behind the ballroom's east wall, pointed down at the corridor junction where the fire exit stairwell met the back-of-house passage. A coordination point, someone monitoring the approach, which meant someone was already watching, which meant his phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. "You found the ones at Apex, too. Stop moving around so much, maintenance man. You're making the clients nervous." Logan looked at the text for 3 seconds. Then he typed back, "Wrong number." He put the phone in his pocket and moved immediately. Not running, never running. Running was information. To the northeast corner of the ballroom level where a fire hose cabinet gave him a wall at his back and sight lines in 3 directions. Whoever was running this operation had eyes on him, which meant they'd identified him as a variable, which meant the timeline was either about to accelerate or they were going to try to neutralize him first. He thought about calling 911. He thought about it seriously for a genuine moment. And then he thought about what happened when you called 911 about a potential kidnapping in progress at a hotel event with 600 guests and no active crime yet in evidence. He thought about the chain of calls, the response time, the chaos of evacuation, the 11 different ways a professional team could move a target in the window between police called and police arrived, especially if they had someone inside the event who knew the moment the call was made. He thought about what had happened the last time he'd trusted a protocol over his own assessment of a situation. He would not make that mistake again. Logan put his phone away and went to find Evelyn Brooks. Getting close to her without looking like he was trying to get close to her was the specific kind of social engineering that he'd always found distasteful and was reasonably good at. He moved to the edge of the main area, picked up a glass of water from a passing tray, and positioned himself near a column roughly 12 feet from where Evelyn was standing talking to two women from the technical partnerships team. He waited. The conversation had a natural arc to it. He could tell from body language and the rhythm of exchanges. It was winding down. In 2 to 3 minutes, she'd be in transition, moving toward the next conversation or the bar or the hallway. He was right. 2 minutes later, she drifted away from the group, a slight smile still on her face from whatever they'd been discussing, and she was angling toward the windows. Logan fell into step beside her like he'd always been heading the same direction. "Ms. Brooks," he said quietly, no performance in his voice. "I need 30 seconds of your time, and I need you to keep looking toward the windows while I talk." She turned to look at him. Of course she did. He hadn't expected anything different. "Your facilities," she said, looking at his badge. "Yes. Logan Mercer. I've been working the maintenance contract here tonight. I also work at Apex. I need you to know 3 things and then do whatever you're going to do with them." She hadn't moved away. He gave her credit for that. A lot of people would have already called for the event security. 3 things, she said. Her voice was level, which told him a lot. There are covert surveillance devices on this floor. The external access points on the north and east sides of the ballroom level have been physically compromised. Someone in this building tonight is coordinating a team outside it. He paused. I filed reports at Apex. They were suppressed. I believe Victor Hale is connected to what's being planned tonight. Silence. She looked at him. Not the way people looked at him when they were dismissing him, with the eyes going slightly unfocused, the attention already moving somewhere else. She looked at him the way Priya Nair had looked at him in the service corridor, like she was processing actual information. "Your maintenance," she said. "Yes. And you found all of this." "I know the building systems. Both buildings." He kept his voice flat and honest. "I could be wrong. I'm not wrong." Something moved across her face. Not quite belief. Not quite doubt. More like a person recalibrating. Then she said, "I'll call. If you call event security, the call goes to the radio network. If someone in the event has a scanner, which they will, the timeline changes the moment you make that call." He watched her process this. "I'm asking you to stay in the center of the room, stay visible, and let me—" "Let you what?" she said. He didn't have a clean answer for that, and he wasn't going to pretend otherwise. "Watch," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. There was something complicated in her expression, the look of someone who has been told their entire professional life to trust systems, protocols, chains of command, and who is standing in front of something that doesn't fit inside any of those containers. "I'll consider what you've said," she said, which was more than he'd expected, and she turned back toward the room. Logan went back to work. Yet, it was Marcus Hale, Victor's younger brother, a name Logan hadn't known until he saw the photograph on the company website at 9 p.m. on his phone in the corner of the service corridor, who made the first move. Marcus was not a corporate man. He had the build and the specific flat economy of movement that Logan associated with hired professionals in a particular field. He'd arrived with the catering staff, which explained how he'd cleared the initial check, and he'd spent the first hour moving through the back-of-house areas in a catering uniform with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this kind of pre-operation surveillance before. Logan spotted him at 10:12 near the east stairwell, talking into a small radio clipped inside his collar. At 10:19, Logan watched from the service corridor as Evelyn Brooks was approached by 2 men he hadn't seen before, both in dark suits, one of whom showed her something on a phone, an urgent message by her expression, and then, with the concerned, helpful body language of men managing a situation, guided her toward the side hallway, away from the center of the room, away from the 200 people who could witness anything. Logan was already moving. He came around the corner of the side hallway in time to see Evelyn's expression change. The precise moment when the helpful guidance became something else, when one of the men took her arm in a way that wasn't a question. He saw her start to pull back, saw the other man position himself to block. "Hey," Logan said. All 3 of them looked at him. He was standing in the hallway in his work shirt, tool bag over his shoulder, a $40 watch on his wrist. In the fluorescent light of the side corridor, he looked exactly like what he appeared to be, a maintenance worker who had wandered into the wrong hallway. One of the suited men said, "Service personnel aren't permitted in this corridor. Please return to—" "Ms. Brooks," Logan said, looking directly at her, ignoring the man completely. "There's a facilities issue with the service elevator that requires your authorization code. I apologize for the interruption." It was nothing, a thin, improvised nothing. But Evelyn's eyes found his, and in them he could see the moment she made her decision. "Of course," she said, and she turned to step toward him, and the man whose hand was on her arm tightened his grip. And then the third man, Marcus, appearing from the east stairwell door 10 feet behind them, said, "We're done talking." What happened next was fast and ugly and not at all graceful, which is what real things usually are. Logan dropped the tool bag. He covered the distance to the nearer suited man in 2 steps and used momentum and leverage in a way that took the man's balance before his brain registered the threat. It wasn't a hit. It was a redirect. Physics applied specifically to remove the grip on Evelyn's arm. And it worked. But the second man was already moving, and Marcus had crossed half the hallway, and Logan took an elbow across the side of his face that snapped his head sideways and lit up the left side of his vision in a bright white burst of pain. He didn't go down. He didn't go down because going down in this particular hallway was not an available option. But Marcus was bigger than the other two and considerably more capable, and in the 30-second scramble that followed, chaotic, close, the kind of fight that had nothing cinematic about it, Logan bought time rather than won. He kept himself between Evelyn and the stairwell door. He used the wall. He used the tool bag when he could reach it. He took hits that he absorbed and kept moving through because stopping was the same as losing. Evelyn did not stand still. He gave her credit for that too. She hit Marcus across the back of the head with a decorative sconce bracket that had been mounted on the hallway wall. Not enough to drop him, but enough to make him recalculate. And in that half-second recalculation, Logan got behind him and the fight changed. 30 seconds after that, Marcus was on the floor and the first suited man was nursing a wrist, and the second was backed against the wall making very reasonable decisions about whether to continue this. Logan was breathing hard. His face hurt in a specific way that meant the next morning was going to be unpleasant. There was blood on his collar, from where his lip had split against Marcus's shoulder. Evelyn was standing 3 feet away, the sconce bracket still in her hand, her hair half down, looking at him. "Are you a maintenance technician?" she said, and it wasn't quite a question. "Yes," he said, still catching his breath. "Are you anything else?" He looked at Marcus on the floor, looked at the stairwell door, thought about the rest of the team that Marcus would have had outside, who were now running a plan that had just lost its inside component. "Right now, I'm the person who needs to get you out of this building," he said. "We can talk about the rest later." She looked at him for another long moment. Then she set the sconce bracket carefully against the wall, like she was returning it to its proper place, and said, "Okay." They didn't make it to the lobby. 2 minutes later, in the North Service corridor, they came around a corner and found 2 more men who had come through the shimmied loading dock door, and whatever advantage Logan had carried out of the hallway fight evaporated in the specific way that advantages do when the numbers change. He had time to put himself between Evelyn and the door. He had time to say, very quietly, "Stay close." And then something went over his head from behind and the lights went out, and the last thing he registered before everything became complicated was the specific smell of the service corridor, cold concrete and cable conduit, and the distant trace of kitchen exhaust, and the understanding, arriving with the flat clarity of something that couldn't be bargained with, that he had not gotten her out in time, and that this was not over. It was, in the worst possible way, just beginning. He came back slowly, the way consciousness always returned after a hard hit, not all at once, but in pieces. Sound arriving before vision, pain arriving before either. The sound was low voices, 3, maybe 4 distinct registers. The particular acoustic quality of a large empty space, concrete walls, high ceiling, a building that had stopped being used for whatever it was built for and hadn't figured out what to be next. Somewhere water was dripping, a slow, irregular tick against a hard floor. The pain was his wrists, zip-tied behind him to a metal chair, and the left side of his face where Marcus's elbow had landed in the hotel corridor, which had since progressed from sharp to a deep structural ache that lived in his jaw and cheekbone simultaneously. There was dried blood on his lip. His ribs on the right side complained when he breathed, which meant something had connected after the lights went out that he hadn't been conscious to register. He kept his eyes mostly closed and his breathing even and spent 60 seconds just listening. 4 men. Marcus, identifiable by voice. 2 others from the hotel corridor. A 4th he hadn't heard before, older by the register of it, giving instructions in short, flat sentences with the economy of someone accustomed to being listened to. That one was in charge, and he was not Marcus's brother. He heard Evelyn's breathing before he heard her voice, the tight, controlled respiration of someone managing fear rather than being managed by it. She was to his left, maybe 8 feet. He opened his eyes enough to confirm. Zip-tied to a matching chair. Her green dress badly torn at the shoulder seam. Her hair fully down now. A bruise forming at her temple. She was upright. Her eyes were open and they were angry, which was better than the alternative. She caught him looking. Something shifted in her expression. Relief, then almost immediately something more complicated. He gave her a small, deliberate nod. Not reassurance. He wasn't going to insult her with reassurance, but acknowledgement. I'm here. I'm thinking. Stay steady. She looked at him for a moment, then looked away. She understood. The warehouse. And it was clearly a warehouse, some former light industrial space on the west side of the city. Based on the highway sound coming through what was left of the roof's ventilation panels, had been set up for exactly this purpose. Generator-powered work lights on stands, a folding table with communications equipment, extension cords running along the walls. Someone had prepared this space before tonight, which meant the hotel operation had a contingency built in from the start, a place to bring people if the primary plan required adaptation. Logan filed this, added it to what he knew. His tool bag was gone, which he'd expected. His phone was gone. His watch, which had a secondary function that the face of it didn't indicate, was also gone, which was more of a loss than the phone. His boots, however, steel-toed, laced high, the pair he'd worn for 4 years, were still on his feet, which was a minor oversight by the kind of people who thought removing phones and watches constituted a thorough search. The zip ties were standard commercial grade. His wrists were positioned with his palms facing outward, which was the default for people who'd learned zip tie restraints from tactical manuals rather than from experience, and it was the wrong orientation if you knew what you were doing, which his captors apparently did not fully know because they'd had a maintenance technician rather than what he actually was. He was working on the ties with small, invisible movements of his wrists when the older voice said, "Bring her over here," and 2 men moved Evelyn's chair to the folding table area, and the dynamic of the room reorganized itself. Logan went still and watched. The man in charge was perhaps 55. Compact, weathered face, the kind of fitness that came from discipline rather than vanity. He wore civilian clothes that sat on him the way civilian clothes always sit on military men. Technically correct, somehow unconvincing. He had a tablet in his hand that he turned to face Evelyn. "Apex Sentinel's classified defense architecture," he said. "The access credentials. You give me those, and both of you are out of here in an hour." Evelyn looked at the tablet, then at him. "You're asking me to commit federal espionage. I'm asking you to make a practical decision. Those are not the same thing." The man tilted his head slightly, the way someone does when they're recalibrating their estimate of who they're dealing with. "Ms. Brooks, the contract your company is competing for is worth approximately $1.2 billion. The system your team developed over the past 3 years has defensive infrastructure applications that are worth considerably more than that to the right buyers. You're 30 years old, you have your whole life in front of you, and the man who tied you to that chair," he nodded toward Logan, "is a facilities technician who got involved in something that had nothing to do with him. Give me the credentials. Go home." "He has a name," Evelyn said. The man blinked. It was a very small blink, but Logan caught it. He hadn't expected that. "His name is Logan Mercer," Evelyn said, "and he told me something was wrong tonight and I didn't listen well enough, and if you hurt him, I will make it my singular professional purpose to burn down every structure you've built, financial, legal, or otherwise. So you should factor that into your practical decision." There was a silence in the warehouse. Logan, from his chair 8 feet away, thought, huh. The man in charge looked at Evelyn for a long moment. Then he stepped back and said to Marcus, "An hour. Then we change the approach." He walked to the communications table. Marcus pulled Evelyn's chair back to its position and returned to the perimeter with the other 2 men. The 4th man, who had been standing near the east wall and hadn't spoken, walked over to Logan. "You awake, maintenance man?" he said. "Yeah," Logan said. The man crouched to get level with him. Late 30s, broader than Marcus, with a broken nose that had been set badly and a way of occupying space that indicated he was the most physically capable person in the room and knew it. "You're going to tell me who you called tonight and who knows you're here." "Nobody," Logan said. "I texted my supervisor I was staying on site. That's it." "No backup? No friends at a government agency who do favors?" "I'm a maintenance tech." The man studied him. "You hit Marcus pretty good for a maintenance tech. He's not as hard to hit as he thinks he is." Something almost like amusement crossed the man's face. Then it was gone. "You should have stayed in the service corridor," he said, not unkindly. "This isn't your problem." "She was going to be taken," Logan said. "That made it my problem." "Noble." The man stood. Stupid, but noble. He walked back to his position by the east wall. Logan went back to work on the zip ties. The thing about restraints, any restraint, zip ties, rope, handcuffs, is that they work on the assumption that the restrained person's primary goal is to get free. That assumption was wrong in this case. Getting free of the ties was step 3. Steps 1 and 2 were more important and required his hands exactly where they were. Step 1 was the room. He spent the next 20 minutes cataloging it, not dramatically, not with obvious head movements. The way he'd learned to do it in a different life, using peripheral vision and the natural motion of someone settling into discomfort. The exits. A large rolling door on the north wall, currently closed. A standard hinged door on the east wall near where the quiet man stood. A second rolling door on the west wall that appeared to be welded or rusted shut. The generator against the south wall. The work lights. 4 of them on stands, positioned to illuminate the center of the space. The communications equipment on the folding table. A dark corridor beyond the east door that smelled like standing water and old concrete and went somewhere he couldn't currently see. Step 2 was Evelyn. Specifically, the distance between her chair and the east door, the number of men between her and that door at any given moment, and whether she was the kind of person who could move fast and stay low in the dark without being told exactly why. He already had a theory about that, based on what he'd seen in the past 2 hours. The theory was, yes, he was finishing the assessment and returning his focus to the zip ties when his phone buzzed on the folding table. The man in charge glanced at it, then looked at Logan. "Someone named Dale," he said. "Texting to ask if you're still on site." "Tell him yes," Logan said, "or don't. Either way, he'll assume the job ran long and go back to sleep." The man considered this. Then he set the phone back down without responding, which was the decision Logan had been hoping he'd make. Unanswered texts from a facilities supervisor to a maintenance tech at midnight were noise. They would not generate a police call. They would generate a mildly annoyed voicemail in the morning. Good. At 12:40, Marcus walked over to Evelyn and said something Logan couldn't hear from 8 feet away. Whatever it was, Evelyn's expression didn't change, which Logan was beginning to understand was her default response to things that frightened her. Not blankness, but a very deliberate stillness, the face she showed the world when she was deciding what to do next. Marcus said something else. She said something back. He didn't like it. Logan could see that in the set of his shoulders, and he leaned in close to her face. "Hey," Logan said. Marcus looked over at him. "Leave her alone," Logan said. It was not a complex sentence. It had nothing clever about it. But the room shifted very slightly around it, the way rooms do when someone says the plain thing instead of the careful thing, and Marcus straightened up and walked toward Logan instead. "You keep talking," Marcus said. "Seems necessary," Logan said. Marcus crouched in front of him, different from the other man, not to assess but to intimidate, which were different skills, and Marcus was better at one than the other. "You know what you are?" he said. "You're a footnote. You're the guy who showed up to something that had nothing to do with him." You know what happens to footnotes? They get cited, Logan said. Footnotes are actually important. Marcus stood up. His jaw was set. You've got maybe 40 minutes before the boss decides the lady isn't going to talk, and then things get worse for both of you. You could help yourself right now by telling us what you know and who you told. I filed 2 reports through Apex's internal security system, Logan said. Both of them went to the Executive Security Committee. One of the 3 committee members is your brother. He watched Marcus's face. You know that. But whoever you're working for, the man at that table, does he know that one of his inside people has a documented paper trail running through a company's security system? Because when this falls apart, and it's going to fall apart, your brother's name is attached to those reports in a way that's going to be very hard to explain. Marcus stared at him. I'm not threatening you, Logan said. I'm just telling you what exists. What you do with that information is your decision. Marcus walked away without saying anything else. Logan went back to work on the zip ties. He got the right wrist loose at 1:15. Not free. He kept his arms in position, kept the visual profile of a restrained man, because getting free was still step 3, and steps 1 and 2 weren't finished. Step 2 required one more piece of information, which arrived at 1:22 when the man in charge stood up from the communications table and said to the room generally, "We're moving in 30, prep the transport." 2 of the 4 men went through the east door into the dark corridor, which left Marcus and the quiet man with the broken nose in the main space, along with the generator, the work lights, and 2 restrained people. 2 men, 2 lights covering his side of the room directly. The generator on the south wall, running on what he estimated was a commercial-grade diesel unit, which would have a manual shut-off toggle on the right side panel. From his chair to the generator, 18 feet. Call it 3 seconds if he moved clean. From the generator shut-off to Evelyn's chair, another 8 feet. Call it 2 more. Total darkness from shut-off to reaching her, 5 seconds, which was enough. If the 2 men's first response to sudden darkness was to reach for phones or weapons, rather than move immediately toward the last known position of the restrained man who hadn't shown any indication of being a problem, they would reach for weapons. People who worked in lit environments always reached for weapons first in sudden darkness. It was a half-second mistake, but it was reliable. What Logan needed was 5 seconds of advantage and a straight line to the east door. He looked at Evelyn. She was watching him. Had been, he suspected, for longer than he'd realized. He held her gaze. Then he looked deliberately at the east door. Looked back at her. Did it again, slow and intentional. She blinked. Once. Looked at the east door. Looked back at him. He gave her the same small nod he'd given her when he woke up. She gave him one back, and something in it was completely different from the scared or the angry or the carefully composed. Something that said, I understand. I'm ready. Don't miss. He didn't plan to miss. At 1:28, Logan Mercer stood up from the chair. Marcus turned, said, Hey, and Logan was already at the generator, hand finding the shutoff toggle on the right panel in the dark, behind his eyes, where it had been for the past 40 minutes, and the lights died. 5 seconds. In the dark, he moved by the map he'd built in his head. The broken-nosed man moved fast, faster than Logan had budgeted for, and clipped his left shoulder hard enough to spin him half around, and Logan used the spin and the momentum and the man's own forward motion against him, and the concrete floor was not kind when the man hit it, but Logan didn't stop to be sorry about that. Marcus was at the wrong position. He'd moved toward Logan's chair rather than toward Evelyn, the wrong read, the fatal assumption. And Logan passed him in the dark close enough to feel the displaced air of his arm sweeping through empty space. He reached Evelyn's chair with his hands already moving, the right hand free, finding the zip tie at her wrists by touch, and he had a blade from the inside of his boot heel, a flat ceramic piece the length of his thumb that nobody checked for because nobody thought to check there, and the tie came apart in 4 seconds, and she was up, and his hand found her arm, and they went through the east door. The corridor was dark and smelled like standing water and old concrete and went straight for roughly 40 feet before turning. Behind them, Marcus was shouting. The generator came back on. Someone had found the shutoff, and the light chased them down the corridor and caught the walls, but not them because they were already at the turn. The two men who had gone to prep transport were at the end of the corridor, beyond the turn. Logan heard them, the sound of boot steps on concrete stopping and reorienting, and he made a decision in the half-second available for it, which was not through them. There was a door on the left wall of the corridor, unmarked, old, the kind of interior door that warehouses accumulate for reasons that outlive memory. It was padlocked. He hit it with his shoulder once, felt it flex, hit it again with everything, and the old jam gave way, and they were in a secondary space. A storage room, long abandoned, boxes rotted to paper, shelving collapsed against the far wall. And a window. High on the south wall, painted shut, the glass long gone and replaced with a sheet of plywood that had seen 20 years of Chicago winters. He was already moving toward it when Evelyn said, low and urgent, "There's something else. I need you to know something. Tell me while we move." Before they put the bag over my head, one of them said they'd rigged the building, the warehouse. I don't know if it was serious or if they were... Logan stopped moving. He turned and looked at her in the dim light bleeding through the gaps in the plywood. Her face was completely serious. "When?" he said. "I don't know. Before the reception. I think before. It was... One of the men said the package is active into his radio when they brought us inside. I thought he meant us. But then the other one said, we need to be clear by 0200, and that was... She checked her wrist for a watch that wasn't there. That was 30 minutes ago. Logan stood in the collapsed storage room and did the math. The transport they'd been prepping, the 2-hour timeline, the phrase package is active. A building rigged before the operation began so that if the operation failed or got complicated, if someone got away, if someone talked, if the inside network got exposed, you could remove the evidence, all the evidence, including the people in it. "Okay," he said. He didn't say it the way people said okay when they meant everything was okay. He said it the way he'd learned to say it in a previous life, which meant, I have the information. I'm adjusting. Keep moving. He turned back to the plywood window and hit it hard with both palms, and it came out in a single piece, old nails giving up without a fight, and the Chicago night came in cold and dark and full of the sound of the expressway. He went through first, turned back, reached up, and Evelyn took his hands without hesitation, and he pulled her through, and they dropped 6 feet to a concrete loading pad that had weeds growing through its cracks. Behind them, inside the warehouse, someone was shouting for Marcus. Logan scanned the perimeter, a chain-link fence 40 feet out. Beyond it, streetlights, the ordinary world continuing its ordinary business at 1:30 in the morning. His face hurt, and his ribs hurt, and his left shoulder was going to be a problem by tomorrow, but none of that was information that changed what needed to happen next. "Can you run?" he said. "Yes." "Don't stop for anything. Fence at the far end, there's a gap on the left side where the pole is rusted. I saw it on the way in." She looked at him. "You saw it on the way in, when they had a bag over your head." I could hear the difference in the traffic sound. The gap faces the street. She stared at him for a moment. Then, quietly, not quite to him, "Who are you?" "Tell you later," he said. "Run." They ran. She was fast. He hadn't known that, hadn't had a reason to know it, but she was genuinely fast, not trying to keep up fast, but real stride-opening velocity. And she hit the fence gap a half step behind him, and they came through onto a street that was lit and public and populated by a handful of cars and a night bus idling at a corner stop. He put his hand out, and she stopped with him, both of them breathing hard. Behind them, through the chain link, he could see lights moving in the warehouse, phones, flashlights, the operational confusion of a plan that had come apart. "Bus," he said. "Now. Don't run. Walk." "Why?" "Running draws attention. Walking draws nothing." She looked at the bus, looked at him, straightened her dress, an automatic gesture, the muscle memory of a person accustomed to composure, and the normalcy of it in the middle of everything almost made him laugh, except nothing was funny yet. They walked to the bus. He paid with the emergency 20 he kept folded inside his left boot, a habit from a different life that he'd never bothered to stop. And they sat in the back, and the bus moved, and the warehouse with its lights and its shouting and its package that was active on a 2-hour timer receded through the rear window. Evelyn sat beside him. Her shoulder was against his. She was looking straight ahead. "They're going to detonate it," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah. The people still inside, Marcus won't let them die in there, Logan said. "He's in over his head, but he's not there." He paused. "The man running the operation. He built in a clean exit. He'll use it." "You sound certain." "I'm not." He looked at the floor of the bus. "I'm making a judgment. I could be wrong." She absorbed this. Then, "We have to call someone." "Yes. But not through channels that run through Victor," he said. "I know." She was quiet for a moment. "I know a number. A federal contact. Someone I was supposed to call if a protocol we set up 3 months ago when the contract got serious." She looked at him. "I didn't think I'd ever actually need it." "Do you have it memorized?" "Yes." "Then we need a phone." The bus had 14 other passengers. A young woman 2 rows up was asleep against the window, her phone dark in her hand. A man near the front was scrolling with his earbuds in. A teenage boy 3 rows back was playing a game, volume off, face lit blue. Logan looked at the teenage boy. The boy looked up, sensed the adult attention, looked back at his game. "Hey," Logan said, "I need to borrow your phone for 2 minutes. My girlfriend and I got jumped. I know how that sounds. I'll give you $40. He pulled the other emergency 20 from his right boot. The boy looked at the $40, looked at Logan's face, which currently provided considerable corroborating evidence for the "got jumped" explanation. Looked at Evelyn, whose torn dress and temple bruise added further support. "You can stand right there while I dial," Logan said. "You can hear the whole call." The boy handed over the phone. The call took 4 minutes. Evelyn spoke for most of it, using a sequence of identifying phrases that meant nothing to Logan but clearly meant something to the person on the other end. And by the time she finished, she had given the warehouse address, the names she knew, Marcus, Victor, and a description of the operation that was concise and specific and delivered without a single tremor in her voice. She handed the phone back, thanked the boy, who pocketed his $40 and returned to his game with the slightly dazed expression of someone whose night had turned out differently than expected. Logan and Evelyn sat in the back of the bus in silence for a moment. Then, at 1:53 a.m., 7 minutes before the 2-hour mark that the man in the warehouse had set, the sky over the west side of Chicago lit up orange and brief, and they felt the bass of it more than heard it, a low concussive thump that moved through the floor of the bus and up through the seats and registered in the chest like a second heartbeat. Several passengers looked out the windows. The teenage boy sat up. The bus kept moving. Evelyn's hand found the edge of the seat between them and held it, and she kept looking straight ahead. And Logan said nothing because there was nothing that needed saying right at this particular moment. And the city went on around them, indifferent and enormous and lit up in the dark, doing what cities do at 2 in the morning, which is keep going regardless. His ribs hurt. His face hurt. He would check both systematically when there was time and light. He thought about Maya asleep at Rachel's house, curled up in the guest bed with her shoes lined up neatly at the door, the way she always did. Convinced that neat shoes were the difference between a good sleepover and a great one. He thought about how tomorrow she was going to tell him about it in the car, with the particular density of detail that only children brought to the narration of sleepovers, and he was going to listen to every word. He thought about the phone in the warehouse on the folding table, the text from Dale, and how in the morning Dale was going to have a very specific kind of morning, the kind that involved federal agents and a lot of questions about his maintenance technician. He thought about Natalie Pierce and the compliance investigation and the financial evidence she'd been building for 3 weeks, and how by morning that investigation was going to matter in ways it hadn't been able to matter tonight. He looked out the window at the city. It had been 15 seconds in the warehouse where he'd turned off the lights and moved through the dark. Not clean, not elegant. His shoulder ached where the broken-nosed man had hit him, and his hands were not entirely steady, and there was still dried blood on his collar, and he had used a ceramic blade the size of his thumb, and the survival instincts of someone trained to function in exactly the kind of impossible dark that tonight had been. 15 seconds. Nobody in that warehouse had believed even for a moment that the man in the grease-stained work clothes was capable of what he was capable of. They'd looked at the badge and the toolbox and the unremarkable face, and they'd made their assumption, and they'd been wrong in the specific way that mattered most. Logan Mercer was very familiar with being underestimated. He had spent 4 years cultivating it. He understood its value and its cost in equal measure. Tonight, it had been a tool like any other. He'd used it, and it had worked. And Evelyn Brooks was sitting beside him on a night bus in Chicago, breathing steadily, instead of being in a vehicle headed somewhere considerably worse. That was the measure of it. That was what mattered. The bus turned north, and the glow of the fire faded behind them, and Logan Mercer leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes and let himself, for just a moment, be a maintenance technician on a bus at 2 a.m. Nothing more and nothing less, just a tired man going home. The federal agents arrived at the bus stop on North Michigan Avenue at 2:17 in the morning, 2 black SUVs pulling to the curb with a quietness that was itself a kind of authority. No sirens, no lights. The kind of response that didn't want to be seen, which told Logan that Evelyn's contact had understood the situation well enough to know that visible federal presence at 2 a.m. would generate questions that nobody was ready to answer yet. He and Evelyn had gotten off the bus 4 stops early by unspoken agreement and waited on a bench outside a closed pharmacy. Evelyn had used the teenage boy's phone number. She'd memorized it off the screen, which Logan noticed and filed, to call her contact back with the updated location. Logan had sat beside her and watched the street and let his body do its accounting. The ribs were bruised, possibly one cracked, the kind of injury that didn't require a hospital unless you made it worse. The face was ugly, but structurally sound. The shoulder had settled from sharp to a dull, persistent complaint that he could work around. The lead agent was a woman named Reyes, early 40s, with the clipped efficiency of someone who had been woken up and had decided not to waste time being annoyed about it. She looked at both of them for a single assessing second and then said, "Vehicle," and that was the extent of the pleasantries. In the back of the SUV, with the heat running and the city moving past the tinted windows, Reyes asked questions, and Evelyn answered them, and Logan sat beside her and answered when asked directly and didn't elaborate beyond what was asked, because that was the right behavior in this specific kind of debrief, and because he had learned a long time ago that the instinct to explain yourself to federal agents was almost always counterproductive. Reyes looked at him at one point, a frank, assessing look that lasted about 3 seconds longer than a casual glance, and said, "You're the maintenance technician." "Yes." "You disabled 4 trained operatives in a dark warehouse." "3," Logan said. "One of them made a reasonable decision not to continue." Reyes looked at him for another moment. "Maintenance technician," she said again, not quite a question, not quite not one. "Apex Sentinel Technologies. 4 years." She wrote something in her notebook and moved on, and Logan appreciated that she didn't push it, because the alternative would have required a conversation he wasn't ready to have in the back of a federal vehicle at 2:30 in the morning. They were taken to a federal field office in the Loop, a floor of a building that looked like any other office building from the outside, and on the inside had the specific fluorescent, coffee-stained, organized chaos quality of a place where people worked serious hours on serious problems. Logan was given ice for his face, which he held there more out of compliance than belief it would help, and a cup of coffee that was bad but hot, and he sat in a conference room while Evelyn was taken to a separate room for a more detailed debrief. He understood the separation. Separate rooms meant separate accounts that could be cross-referenced. Standard procedure. He didn't take it personally. What he took personally was the moment, about 40 minutes in, when a different agent, younger, in a suit that was slightly too new, with the eager quality of someone who had recently been promoted into something he wasn't entirely ready for, sat across from Logan and put a folder on the table between them. "Mr. Mercer," the agent said, "we've been running your background." Logan set the ice pack down. "Your service record is partially classified," the agent said, carefully, like he was navigating terrain he hadn't been fully briefed on. "What we can access shows a 9-year Navy career, honorable discharge, multiple commendations. What we can't access," he paused, "is significant." "Yeah," Logan said. "The discharge was voluntary." "Yes." You left at 32 years old, with a career trajectory that, the agent looked at the folder again, that doesn't typically end at 32. Logan picked up the coffee cup and drank from it and said nothing. There was an incident, the agent said, 18 months before your discharge. We can see the edges of it. Classified operation, significant casualties, subsequent internal review. He looked up. The review was sealed. The conference room was very quiet. Somewhere outside the door, phones were ringing and people were moving, and the ordinary machinery of a federal investigation was running at 2:30 in the morning, because that's what it did. In here, it was just Logan and the agent and the sealed thing at the edge of everything. I know what's in that review, Logan said. I'm sure you do. Is there a question somewhere in this? The agent sat back. Victor Hale's legal team has already been in contact with our office. He's claiming he had no knowledge of the operation. He's claiming that the security reports filed by an Apex maintenance technician over the past 2 weeks represent a pattern of harassment and unauthorized interference in executive security protocols. The agent paused. He's claiming that the same maintenance technician has an undisclosed military history that may explain an inappropriate escalation of what was otherwise a manageable internal security situation. Logan put the coffee cup down, very carefully. He's claiming I made this worse. He's preparing to claim it, yes, publicly, if necessary. He orchestrated a kidnapping. He's saying he can't be held responsible for actions taken by a contractor security team that he claims he had no direct knowledge of. Marcus Hale is his brother. His lawyer is saying Marcus acted independently. The agent looked at him steadily. Mr. Mercer, I'm not telling you I believe any of this. I'm telling you what we're going to be dealing with in the next 24 hours. Victor Hale has resources, and he's going to use them, and the first thing he's going to do is make you the story. Logan understood this. He had understood it was possible from the moment he'd filed that first report and watched it disappear into a committee that Victor had access to. You couldn't document a conspiracy run by someone inside a system and then be surprised when that person used the system against you. What he hadn't calculated, what he should have and hadn't, was how fast it would move. Victor had been ready for this contingency, which meant he'd been preparing it before tonight, which meant somewhere in the timeline of the past 3 weeks, he had looked at Logan's maintenance records and seen the flag and made a decision, the sealed review, the classified service history, the quiet man with the grease-stained toolbox who filed reports through proper channels and fixed boilers at 2 in the morning because people were working in the cold. Victor had been planning to use all of it. He just hadn't expected to need it this soon. What do you need from me? Logan said. Right now? Nothing. Go to the hospital, get your ribs checked, get some sleep. Don't talk to press. Don't post anything. Don't contact anyone at Apex. The agent closed the folder. There's going to be a process here, and you need to let it run. I filed 2 internal reports, Logan said. Both went to the Executive Security Committee. Victor's on that committee. You should be able to pull the access logs from the Apex security system to see when those reports were viewed, forwarded, and deleted. The agent looked at him. We're already on that. Good. Natalie Pierce, compliance investigator, contract position, been on site 3 weeks. She was building a financial audit. Whatever she found connects Victor to the funding structure of the operation. She may not know how much danger she's in. The agent wrote the name down. We'll find her. Logan nodded, stood up. His ribs made their objection known. Am I free to go? Someone will drive you. The agent stood too. He held out his hand and Logan shook it. For what it's worth, the agent said, what you did tonight. I know, Logan said. He didn't mean it dismissively. He meant, I know what it was and what it wasn't, and I don't need it named. Find Natalie Pierce tonight, he said. Don't wait until morning. He left the conference room and found Reyes in the hallway, and she arranged a car, and he gave the driver Rachel's address because that was where Maya was and where he needed to be. And he sat in the back seat and watched Chicago go past and let the tiredness that he'd been holding at arm's length for hours finally come in and sit with him. Rachel opened the door before he knocked. She'd been waiting. He could see it in the way she stood, already dressed, the light on behind her. She looked at his face and said nothing for a moment, just looked, the way older sisters looked when the thing they'd been afraid of had happened in a version they hadn't quite imagined. Hospital? She said. Tomorrow? Logan, I need to see her first. Rachel stepped back. He went through the living room to the guest room, eased the door open without making a sound. Maya was asleep the way she always slept, on her side with one hand open near her face, her hair spread across the pillow, her shoes lined up at the door with the careful precision of someone who believed in the power of orderly shoes. He stood there a while. Then he pulled the door almost closed and went back to the kitchen and sat at Rachel's table, and she put tea in front of him without asking and sat across from him. How bad? She said. Ribs, face, nothing permanent. That's a relative term. I know. She watched him. Rachel was 38 and had her mother's eyes and their father's stubbornness, and she was the person in the world who knew Logan best, which was both a comfort and an exposure he'd mostly made his peace with. Was it related to the job? She said. He looked at the tea. Maintenance. Logan. He looked up. It's handled, he said. Or it's starting to be handled. There are people working on it now. Were you... She stopped, reorganized. Did you... I got someone out of a bad situation, he said. That's all I'm going to say tonight. She nodded slowly. She knew what that meant. She'd known what it meant for 32 years, through a childhood where their father had come home from 2 deployments saying similar things, through 9 years of watching Logan do the same work in different theaters, through 4 years of what was supposed to be quiet. She's fine, Rachel said. Maya, she had a good time. She and Caitlin stayed up too late watching a nature documentary about sea turtles, and then Caitlin cried about sea turtles for 20 minutes, and Maya explained the conservation efforts in detail to make her feel better. Rachel paused. Your daughter is going to be a scientist or a diplomat, possibly both. Logan smiled, which made his lips split open again slightly, which he ignored. She gets that from you. She gets the science from me. The calm in a crisis is all you. Rachel reached across the table and put her hand over his for a moment. Sleep on the couch. I'll drive Maya to school in the morning so you can rest. I'll drive her, he said. Logan, I'll drive her, he said again, quiet. Not argued, just stated. Rachel looked at him for a long moment. Then she took her hand back and stood up. Couch is made up, she said. There's ibuprofen in the cabinet. He thanked her, and she went to bed, and he sat at the kitchen table for a while longer, not thinking about much, letting the night settle into its proper shape, the distance between what had happened and what was still happening beginning to resolve into something he could hold. His face hurt. The ibuprofen was where Rachel said it was. He took it and lay on the couch and was asleep in approximately 4 minutes. The morning moved as way mornings did, with an indifference to the night before that Logan had always found both frustrating and necessary. Maya came out at 7, saw him on the couch, and said, "Why are you at Aunt Rachel's?" And then saw his face and said, "What happened to your face?" And he said, "I bumped into something at work." And she looked at him with the deep professional skepticism of a 7-year-old who had heard this kind of explanation before, but she accepted it because some knowledge is best arrived at gradually. And she was 7, and there were scrambled eggs to consider. He made them with the right amount of cheese. She sat at the kitchen table and ate, and told him about the sea turtle documentary, and about Caitlin's emotional response to the sea turtle documentary, which Maya described with compassion, but also a certain analytical detachment that Rachel had apparently been correct about. He drove her to school. He listened to the whole thing about Brianna and the capital of Australia, which apparently had continued to generate controversy. He crouched at the school entrance, and she hugged him with the fierce, sudden totality that she always did. And then she was gone through the doors, and he stood in the cold and breathed carefully around his ribs and watched the door close behind her. Then he took himself to urgent care, where a physician's assistant confirmed 1 cracked rib and 2 bruised ones, provided a brace, told him to rest, and looked at his face with the manner of someone who had opinions about how it had gotten that way, but had learned to keep those opinions professionally contained. He was back in his apartment by 10 a.m., showered, in clean clothes, with a phone charger borrowed from Rachel because his phone was still on a folding table in a burned warehouse on the west side of Chicago. He was sitting at his kitchen table with a laptop open when his doorbell rang. It was Evelyn Brooks. She was not in the green dress. She was in dark jeans and a plain gray coat, and her hair was down, and she had a bruise at her temple that the morning light made more visible than the fluorescent conference room had. She was holding 2 coffees from the place 3 blocks away, the good one, and she held one out when he opened the door. He took it, stepped back. She came in. She stood in his kitchen and looked at it. The drawings on the refrigerator, the solar system model still half assembled on the table from last week, the 7-year-old's artwork magnetic clipped to every available surface. And something moved through her expression that he didn't try to name. "Your daughter," she said. "Maya," he said. "She's at school." Evelyn nodded. She sat at the kitchen table across from his laptop and wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. The composure she carried so consistently was still there but thinner than usual, and she wasn't working to hide that, which he appreciated. "Victor held a press conference at 8 a.m., she said. Logan sat down. "Tell me." "He's claiming you have an undisclosed history of psychological instability connected to your military discharge. He's claiming the kidnapping was a staged event, that you orchestrated it to expose a conspiracy that didn't exist as a way to leverage your position in the company and access classified systems you weren't authorized for." She paused. "He's claiming that Evelyn Brooks, that I, was a willing participant who got in over my head when your plan escalated beyond what either of us intended." Logan held his coffee cup and looked at the table. "He has a lawyer who is very good at this," she said. "The press conference was structured. He had documentation, fabricated, but it looked real. He had a statement from the operations manager saying the security reports you filed were flagged internally as procedurally irregular. He had a psych evaluation. I don't know where from. It may be completely fabricated, claiming service-related instability." "He's been building this," Logan said, "since before tonight." "Yeah." He looked up. "How are you handling it?" She met his eyes. "I'm sitting in a maintenance technician's kitchen at 10 in the morning because I don't know who else to talk to right now, so not perfectly." Something in his chest responded to the honesty of that in a way he didn't fully examine. "You have a board," he said. "Legal counsel. My board watched that press conference this morning. 3 of them have already called me. 2 they're not sure. They want to give Victor the benefit of the doubt, which is what you do when someone presents a convincing enough case, and the alternative is admitting you let a conspiracy run unchecked inside your own company for months." She paused. "The 3rd one told me to issue a statement distancing myself from you." "You should consider it," Logan said. She looked at him. "I mean it," he said. "Your company is about to make a decision on a $1 billion defense contract. Victor is trying to reframe the narrative before the evidence catches up to him. If standing beside me cost you that contract, cost you the company—" "Stop," she said. He stopped. "You went into that hotel knowing something was wrong," she said. "You filed reports that were buried. You stayed when you could have left. You put yourself between me and those men in the corridor when the reasonable thing, the safe thing, was to call someone and wait." She set her coffee cup down. "And now you're telling me to distance myself from you. I'm telling you there's a practical cost to—" "I know what the practical cost is." Her voice was even. "I also know what it costs to be the person who lets Victor Hale rewrite what happened because it's expensive to say otherwise." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not going to be that person." Logan was quiet for a moment. "Natalie Pierce," he said. "Did they find her?" "I got a message from Reyes at 6 this morning. Natalie had already put everything in a secondary system, a personal encrypted backup that she set up 3 weeks ago when she started finding things that made her uncomfortable." Evelyn's expression shifted, something that was almost a smile, but too serious to quite get there. She's 29 years old, and she backed up every document to a system that Victor didn't know existed. Bank transfer records, shell company registrations, financial authorizations that connect Victor to the operation's funding chain going back 11 months. 11 months, Logan said. He started planning this when the defense contract went into final evaluation phase. He needed the contract to go to Apex, then he needed to control Apex, then he needed the technology to go somewhere specific. She paused. The man who ran the warehouse operation, the older man, the one in charge. His name is Richard Calloway. He's ex-private military. He works for a group that acquires defense technology on behalf of foreign buyers. Victor made contact with him 14 months ago. She paused. He was going to sell everything, the system, the contract, the access codes. He was going to let me disappear and take control of the board and run the whole company into a buyer's hands within 18 months. The kitchen was quiet. Logan looked at the solar system model on the table. Maya's handwriting on the little label that said Saturn stuck to the foam ball with a toothpick, crooked and determined. Natalie Pierce, he said again. She's okay. She's been in federal protective custody since 3 this morning. She didn't know how much danger she was in. Evelyn paused. She asked about you. She said you told her to be careful 2 weeks ago. I told her to be careful about who she talked to. She said the way you said it made her take it seriously. Evelyn looked at him. She backed up those files 2 days later. He thought about the service corridor on the 7th floor, the young woman with 3 months on the job and the radical belief that wrong things should be made right. The way she'd stood there and told him what she'd found and then stood up straighter when he'd given her the only honest advice he had. She did the right thing, he said. Yes, Evelyn said. She did. A silence sat between them that was not uncomfortable. Outside, a car went past. The neighbor's dog made a single comment about something and then stopped. Then Evelyn said, I want to hold a press conference. Logan looked at her. Today, she said. This afternoon, if Reyes clears it. I want to stand up in front of whatever cameras are there and tell the truth about what happened. All of it. Your reports, the buried evidence, what Victor has been building for 11 months. She paused. And I want you there. I'm a maintenance technician, he said. I know what you are, she said, and the way she said it was different from the hallway at the Meridian when she'd said the same thing. Different weight, different knowledge behind it. She wasn't asking about the classified service history or the sealed review or the 9 years of work that had ended at 32 because of something Logan hadn't spoken about to anyone except Rachel, and even then only partially. She was saying, I know what I've seen, I know what it means. You don't have to explain anything, she said. You just have to stand there. Logan thought about the press conference, about cameras and questions and journalists who would find the classified gaps in his record and start building the kind of story that followed you in a way that was hard to manage when you had a 7-year-old daughter who went to school with other kids, who had parents who read things on the internet. He thought about Victor Hale at a podium at 8 in the morning, measured and practiced, reading from a statement prepared by lawyers who were very good at this. He thought about Priya Nair, who had found him in a service corridor and told him what she'd found, and gone back to her desk and quietly moved her files to a separate system because a maintenance technician had told her to be careful. He thought about what it meant to be the person who said something when saying something cost you something. I need to make a phone call first, he said. She nodded. He borrowed her phone, his was still in federal evidence, and called Rachel. Is Maya still at school? Until 3, Rachel said. Why? Logan, I've been watching the news. I know, she's going to hear things. Can you be there to pick her up? I want her to hear it from you before she hears it anywhere else. Tell her that her dad is fine and that he's going to explain everything tonight. A pause. Everything? Enough of everything for a 7-year-old, he said. The version where the person who needed help got help, and the people who did wrong things are going to be held accountable for them. That's the version she'll understand, Rachel said quietly. Yeah, he said. I know. He gave the phone back to Evelyn. She was watching him. He stood from the kitchen table and his ribs registered their continued objection, and he breathed through it. Okay, he said. She stood too. She had her coffee in one hand and the morning light came through the kitchen window and she looked tired and purposeful and like someone who had made a decision and had stopped the part of the process where you second guess it. When they ask about your history, she said, if they ask about the military, I'll answer what I answer, he said. I'm not ashamed of any of it. She looked at him steadily. What happened? The sealed review. You don't have to tell me. I'm just... She stopped, started again. You left something significant, and you ended up fixing boilers in a sub-basement. I'm not asking to be intrusive. I just think we lost people, he said. She waited. An operation. 11 years ago. We lost 4 members of my team because someone above us in the chain made a decision based on intelligence that was wrong, and they knew it was possibly wrong, and they made it anyway, and 4 of my people died for it." He looked at the kitchen table. The review happened. The review found procedural errors at the command level. The review was sealed. He paused. "I left because I couldn't spend another 9 years working inside a structure that could do that and call it acceptable." The kitchen was very quiet. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said, and she said it the way people said it when they meant it rather than when they were filling space with it. "It was a long time ago," he said. "Doesn't mean it doesn't still—" "No," he said, "it doesn't." She nodded once. She didn't try to do anything with it beyond acknowledge it, which was the right response, and he noted it. "There's a training center," he said after a moment. If this resolves the way it should resolve, I want a training center built. Emergency response. Named for one of the men I lost." He looked at her. "Not as a condition, not a negotiation, just, when this is done, if there's any conversation about what comes next, that's what I'd want." She looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said, "that's what happens." The press conference was at 3 p.m. in the atrium of Apex Sentinel's building on North Michigan Avenue, because Evelyn made the decision that it would happen on company ground, in company space, because Apex was her company and she was not going to be maneuvered out of her own house. Logan stood beside her in clean clothes and a jaw that was visibly bruised and ribs that made him hold himself slightly differently than usual. And when the questions came, he answered the ones he could answer and said, "I can't speak to that," about the ones he couldn't, and he did not apologize for anything he'd done or explain himself beyond the facts as he knew them. Victor Hale's lawyer issued a counterstatement at 3:45. By 4 p.m., the federal investigation had gone public, which meant the counterstatement landed in a news cycle that was already moving in a different direction. And there is a specific kind of moment when a carefully constructed narrative meets a current of documented evidence, and you can watch the structure begin to come apart. And this was that moment. Natalie Pierce's financial documentation went into federal evidence at 4:30. Victor Hale was arrested at 6:12 p.m. at a hotel in Evanston where he had apparently been since early morning, which suggested he had understood from the moment the warehouse operation failed that the morning's press conference was a delay rather than a solution. Logan watched this happen from a chair in Evelyn's office, where someone had brought him coffee and he was waiting because Reyes had asked him to stay available and because there was nowhere he particularly needed to be for the next 2 hours. He watched the news feed on a screen on the wall, and he drank his coffee, and he thought about the morning, about what he'd told Evelyn in the kitchen, about the 4 men whose names he still carried the way you carry things that have no proper place to be put down. Victor Hale's face appeared on the screen, that practiced ease, that prepared calm. And then the next image was the federal building entrance, and 2 agents on either side of a man who no longer looked practiced or calm, and Logan watched this for a moment, and then looked away because the satisfaction of it was not the point, and he had never been good at satisfaction anyway. He thought about Maya, at Rachel's, hearing a version of tonight that was true and manageable and age-appropriate. He thought about the solar system model with Saturn's crooked label. He thought about signature whistles and the capital of Australia and scrambled eggs with the correct amount of cheese. He thought, I just want this specific thing, and for the first time since he'd crouched in a service corridor on the 7th floor and found a device that shouldn't have been there, he thought maybe the 2 things, the life he wanted and the person he was, were not as irreconcilable as he'd spent 4 years trying to make them. Evelyn came back into the office at 7. She looked tired in a real way, not a managed way, the specific tiredness of someone who had been running on clarity and adrenaline and had finally gotten to the moment where both of those ran out. She sat behind her desk and looked at him. "Victor is in federal custody," she said. "I saw. Calloway's team, 3 of them were picked up in Wisconsin. 2 are still at large." She paused. "Reyes says they'll find them." "They probably will," he said. A silence. Then she said, "I owe you an apology." He looked at her. "At the reception," she said, "when you came to me. I told you I'd consider what you said, which was," she paused, "which was the most corporate non-answer I have ever given anyone, and I gave it to the man who was trying to keep me from being kidnapped. You didn't know me, Logan said. I know. I know that's the reasonable explanation. She looked at him steadily. I still should have listened better. He held the coffee cup. You hit Marcus Hale with a wall sconce, he said. That was good listening. Something happened to her face, the exhaustion cracking open for a moment into something that was genuinely, helplessly amused, and then settling back into tiredness. I cannot believe I hit someone with a wall sconce, she said. It helped, he said. I panicked. You moved, he said. Panicking and not moving is the problem. You panicked and moved. That's different. She looked at him. The tired, fractured look of someone at the end of a very long night followed by a very long day. Are you always like this? She said. Like what? Calm, she said. Like the world is running at a different speed than you are. He thought about that. About Maya on the school doorstep, fierce and sudden. About Rachel's kitchen and the ibuprofen in the cabinet. About service corridors and the particular silence of a building at 2 a.m. that had started to feel, over 4 years, like a thing he'd chosen rather than a thing he'd settled for. I'm not calm, he said. I'm just slow to show the other thing. She nodded slowly. She understood something in that. He could tell, even if she didn't say what. He stood up. The ribs reminded him. He breathed through it. I'm going to pick up my daughter, he said. Evelyn stood too. Logan, she said. He turned. She looked at him for a moment in the quiet of the office, the city visible through the windows behind her, the news feed still running on the wall with Victor Hale's story, becoming a different story than the one he'd written for it this morning. Thank you, she said. Not the way people said it when they were completing a transaction. The way people said it when they meant the full weight of it and didn't have a better word. He nodded once. Then he went to get his daughter. Maya found out the way children find out most things that matter. Not in one clean moment, but in pieces. Over several days, assembled from what adults told her and what she overheard and what she put together herself with the particular quiet intelligence that Logan had been watching develop in her since she was old enough to sit still and listen. Rachel had been there at school pickup on the day of the press conference, like Logan had asked, and she had told Maya a version that was true and manageable. Your dad helped someone who was in danger. Some bad people tried to hurt them. The bad people were caught. Your dad has some bruises, but he's okay. Maya had listened to this with her hands folded in her lap in the back seat of Rachel's car, her face doing the thing it did when she was processing rather than reacting. And when Rachel finished, Maya had said, Is he going to be okay? And Rachel had said yes, and Maya had said okay, and then asked if they could stop for ice cream, which Rachel had interpreted correctly as Maya's way of establishing that life was continuing in a normal direction. Logan had been home by 8. Maya was already in pajamas on the couch, the ice cream finished, watching something about migratory birds on the Nature Channel with the focused attention she gave to anything involving animals. He'd sat down beside her, and she'd leaned into him immediately, her head against his arm, and he'd put his arm around her, and they'd watched birds navigate thousands of miles by magnetic field and star pattern without saying much about anything. At the commercial break, she'd looked up at him. His face was still bruised. The left side, jaw and cheekbone, the kind of bruise that had committed to being visible for at least another week. She studied it with a 7-year-old's directness, no performance of not looking. Does it hurt? She said. Some, he said. But you're okay. Yeah, he said. I'm okay. She looked at him a moment longer, then she turned back to the television. Then she turned back again. Aunt Rachel said you helped someone. I did. A lady? Yes. Maya absorbed this. Was she scared? Logan thought about Evelyn in the hotel hallway, hitting Marcus Hale with a wall sconce. For a little while, he said. Then she got less scared. Because of you? Because of herself, mostly, he said, which was the honest answer. I just made some space for her to do that. Maya considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Then she said, Okay, settled back against him, and returned her full attention to the migratory birds. Logan held his daughter on the couch and breathed carefully around his cracked rib, and thought about the word okay and how it meant different things depending on who said it and how. When he said it, it usually meant I have assessed the situation and determined we can continue. When Maya said it, it usually meant I have decided to trust you so we can move forward. The gap between those two meanings was not as large as it sometimes seemed. He was still thinking about that when she fell asleep against him 20 minutes later, which was the way the best evenings usually ended. Mom. The legal process that followed was not clean or fast or satisfying in any narrative sense. Victor Hale's lawyers were as good as advertised, and they spent the first 3 weeks doing what good lawyers do when the evidence against their client is substantial. They attacked the perimeter. They questioned the chain of custody of Natalie Pierce's financial documentation. They challenged the admissibility of the surveillance device evidence, arguing that Logan's discovery of them constituted unauthorized interference with company property. They filed a civil action against Logan personally, citing the physical injuries sustained by Marcus Hale and the two operatives in the hotel corridor, framing them as excessive force perpetrated by a private citizen with undisclosed combat training. Logan received the civil filing on a Tuesday morning, read it at his kitchen table while his coffee went cold, and then called the federal attorney who had been assigned as his contact and read the relevant sections aloud. The attorney, a woman named Sandra Okafor, who had a dry, precise quality that Logan had come to appreciate, listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Mercer, I need you to understand something about how this works." "Okay," he said. "Victor Hale is filing civil actions because it's the only tool he has left that might create enough noise to complicate the federal case. He's not going to win the civil suit. What he's hoping is that the cost of defending it, financial, reputational, emotional, makes you less effective as a cooperating witness." She paused. "He did the same thing with Natalie Pierce. Her filing arrived the same morning. Is she? She's fine. She has representation. The federal case is strong enough that his civil maneuvers are ultimately going to go nowhere. But they're going to take time and they're going to be unpleasant." Another pause. "How are you holding up?" It was a question that cut against the formal register of everything that had come before it, and he appreciated that too. "I'm okay," he said. "Your daughter?" "She's resilient," he said. "Kids know when things are serious, but they deal with it by putting one day in front of the other, which is honestly the right approach." "Smart kid," Okafor said. "Yeah," he said. "She is." What he didn't say, because Okafor was his attorney and not his therapist, was that the hardest part of the 3 weeks following the warehouse wasn't the civil filing or the federal depositions or the press coverage that came and went in cycles. The hardest part was the night, 10 days in, when Maya came home from school and said that a kid in her class had told her that her dad was on the news for fighting people, and was that true, and why? He'd sat with her at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd watched the press conference on a borrowed laptop, where he'd told Evelyn about the 4 men he'd lost. And he told her a version of the truth that was as complete as he could make it for someone her age. He told her that when he was younger, before she was born, he had a different job, that the job was dangerous but important, that he was trained to help people in situations where other kinds of help couldn't reach them fast enough, that he left that job because some people in charge of it made decisions that got his friends killed, and because he'd had her by then, and he wanted to be the kind of father who came home. She listened. Her hands were folded on the table. Her face was doing the processing thing. "Like Corman Reyes?" she said. He stopped. "What?" "In the book," she said. "The one about the Navy on the bookshelf. There's a man named Corman Reyes who helps people and then has to stop." Logan looked at his daughter, 7 years old, with her mother's dark hair and his flat gray eyes and a memory that cataloged everything she'd ever read or watched or overheard, organized and retrievable. He had a book on the shelf that he'd bought at a used bookstore 3 years ago and never read past the first chapter. She had apparently read it and retained it and was now using it to understand her father. "Kind of like that," he said. "Did you help people like that before?" "Yes." "And now you fix things." "Yeah," he said. "Now I fix things." She thought about this. "But you still help the lady," she said. "Even though you fix things now." "I did." She looked at him with the particular directness that he would never fully get used to, no matter how long she was his. "I think," she said carefully, the way she said things she'd been thinking about for a while, "that you're probably both. You fix things and you help people. You've been doing both the whole time. You just didn't want to say so." Logan sat at the kitchen table and looked at his daughter and did not say anything for a moment because there are moments when saying nothing is the only response that fits. "Yeah," he said eventually, I think maybe you're right." She nodded, apparently satisfied, and asked if there was any of the good cereal left, and he said yes, and life resumed its forward motion. The federal case against Victor Hale concluded 4 months after the night at the warehouse. The guilty plea to conspiracy to commit espionage, kidnapping, and multiple counts of securities fraud came on a Thursday morning without a trial, which was what happened when the evidence was comprehensive enough and the defense team was experienced enough to understand that a trial would only produce a longer sentence and considerably more exposure. Victor Hale was sentenced to 22 years. Callaway's 2 remaining operatives had been found in Michigan 6 weeks in, living in a rented lake house under names that almost but didn't quite withstand scrutiny, which was the operational standard of people who were very good at their jobs, but had run out of network to support them. Callaway himself was in federal custody, facing charges that extended well beyond the Apex operation, as the investigation had discovered that the warehouse night was not his first time running this kind of acquisition for foreign buyers. He would not be out before he was an old man. Marcus Hale pleaded guilty to a reduced set of charges in exchange for testimony that helped fill in the operational gaps the federal case needed. He received 7 years. Logan had no strong feelings about this except that it was the legal system working approximately as designed, which was imperfect but better than the alternatives. Natalie Pierce's civil suit was dismissed on a Friday afternoon, which Sandra Okafor communicated to Logan by text. "Civil case dismissed. See you for deposition prep Monday." Logan's own civil suit was dismissed the following week, once Victor's plea removed the primary engine of its credibility. Priya Nair, the junior security analyst who had found Logan in a service corridor on the 7th floor and told him about the shell company in Schaumburg, was offered a permanent position at Apex with a title upgrade and a salary that reflected what she was actually worth rather than what she'd been hired at. She accepted, on the condition, she told Logan later, that her job description be formally amended to include explicit authority to escalate security concerns to the board level, bypassing the Executive Security Committee if necessary. Evelyn had agreed before Priya finished the sentence. Logan heard about this secondhand from Dale, who had taken to calling him on Friday afternoons to narrate the week's events at Apex Sentinel with the editorial energy of someone who had spent 30 years watching institutions function and had opinions about all of it. "They gave that Nair girl a real title," Dale said on one of these calls. "Associate Director of Security Compliance. What does that even mean?" "It means her job is to find things that are wrong and tell people with authority to fix them," Logan said. "That's what everybody's job is supposed to be." "Yeah," Logan said. "Supposed to be." Dale was quiet for a moment. "You going to come back?" he said. "Your maintenance contract technically isn't terminated. HR is in some kind of standoff about it." Logan looked out his kitchen window at the February street, the kind of gray Chicago cold that doesn't argue with you, just settles in and waits. "I don't know yet," he said, which was true. "Because if you're not coming back," Dale said, "I need to tell Henderson about the 7th floor badge reader. It's been having issues again. Tell Henderson to check the terminal contact points before he replaces the whole reader," Logan said. "It's usually the contacts." "See," Dale said, "this is why I need you back." The conversation with Evelyn about what came next happened not in a boardroom or a lawyer's office, but in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the Apex building, 6 weeks after Victor's plea, on a gray afternoon in early spring when the city was in the transitional state that felt like it couldn't decide whether winter was over. She was already there when he arrived, coffee in front of her, her laptop open but not being looked at. She'd cut her hair, shorter than before, the kind of change people made when they were coming out of something and wanted the outside to reflect the inside. She looked like herself, but a cleaner version, the one that wasn't carrying the weight of an 11-month conspiracy she hadn't known was running inside her own company. He sat across from her and ordered coffee, and they didn't immediately say anything significant, which had become a quality of their interactions over the past 2 months. The ability to not fill silence with words, to let things settle into whatever shape they were going to settle into. "How's Maya?" she said. "She's good. She's doing a project on migratory birds. She's been at it for 3 weeks. I think it's going to be the most comprehensive second-grade report on bird navigation in the history of the Chicago public school system." Evelyn smiled. "She sounds like a person with a specific relationship to thoroughness." "She gets it from me," he said, "which is either a gift or an imposition depending on who you ask." "I'd call it a gift," she said. He drank his coffee. Outside, a woman walked past with a stroller and a dog, and the particular multi-armed exhaustion of someone managing too many things in a wind. "I want to talk about the security division," Evelyn said. This was the thing they'd been circling since December, in pieces, never quite landing on it directly. Apex was restructuring in the aftermath of Victor's departure. His arrest had created board vacancies, operational gaps, a need to rebuild trust with the government partners who had watched the defense contract get suspended, pending an audit of everything Victor had touched. The contract was not dead. The audit had found the technology clean. Whatever Victor had planned to sell, he hadn't had time to compromise the actual system. And the government evaluation panel had extended the timeline for the final decision rather than pulling it. But the company needed to demonstrate, in concrete terms, that what had happened was not systemic, that there were structures in place to prevent it from happening again. Not PR structures. Real ones. "I want to build it right," Evelyn said. "Not a box on an org chart. An actual independent security function with direct board reporting, its own authority to investigate and escalate, staffed by people who know what they're looking at." She looked at him steadily. "I want you to help design it." Logan turned his coffee cup in his hands. "I'm a maintenance technician." "Logan," she said, with a patience that had a slight edge to it. "I know," he said. I want to be clear about what I am and what I'm not. I can tell you what the gaps were. I can tell you what made it possible for someone to plant 4 surveillance devices in a company security building over a 3-week period and have 2 formal reports buried before anyone with authority to act on them saw them. I can tell you what a real reporting structure looks like from the inside." He paused. "What I'm not is an executive. I don't want a title. I don't want a corner office." "I'm not offering you a corner office," she said. "I'm offering you a consulting role. You come in, you tell us what's broken, you help us build something that works, and you go home to your daughter." She paused. "On your terms, your schedule." He looked at her. "You'd have to hire people who actually want to do this work full-time. People like Priya Nair, but with more experience." "Already started," she said. "I've got 2 candidates. I want your opinion on them before I make any decisions." "Natalie Pierce should be involved," he said. "I've already asked her. She said yes, on the condition that her role is formal and documented and not subject to executive override." Evelyn almost smiled. She used almost exactly those words. "She's good," Logan said. "Yes," Evelyn said. "She is." She looked at him. "Will you do it?" He thought about it. Not as a performance of consideration, but actually thought about it, the way he thought about things, working through what it required and what it changed and what it meant for the parts of his life that he'd built carefully and wanted to protect. It wasn't the same as going back. It wasn't a return to a previous version of himself. It was something else, a use of what he knew, on his own terms, in service of something he could see the value of clearly. Building the kind of structure that might mean the next person who found something wrong in a service corridor had somewhere real to take it. The kind of structure where a 24-year-old with 3 months on the job didn't have to wonder whether speaking up would cost her everything. That was worth something. That was actually worth something to him. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. And that was that. The training center was announced in April at a company-wide meeting that Evelyn ran from the main floor of the Apex building with every employee present, The kind of meeting that announced itself as different from regular meetings by the simple fact of including everyone rather than only the people with the right kind of badge. She spoke about the restructuring first, the new reporting structures, the independent security division, the board composition changes. She spoke about Natalie Pierce's role and Priya Nair's expanded authority and the audit results that confirmed the defense technology was clean and the government evaluation had been reinstated. She spoke about accountability in a way that named specific failures rather than gesturing at systemic issues, because gesturing at systemic issues was what organizations did when they wanted to sound serious without being specific, and she was done with that. And then she talked about the training center. Emergency response. First year operational by fall. Named for Corporal Daniel Reyes, United States Navy, who had died 11 years ago in an operation whose review was sealed and whose name, until now, had not appeared anywhere associated with Apex Sentinel Technologies or anyone in it. Logan was standing near the back of the room. He had not been asked to speak, and he had not offered. He was there the way he was usually there, present, observant, a man at the edge of a room who understood the room better than most people in the center of it. When Evelyn said the name, she said it looking at him, not performing it, just looking at him, the way you looked at someone when you wanted them to know that the thing you were doing for real. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked at the floor. His chest did something complicated, the kind of complicated that didn't resolve into words, and he didn't try to make it. Danny Reyes had been 26 years old, from Tucson, Arizona, with a younger sister he sent money to every month and a laugh that could be heard from 3 rooms away, and a specific, incorruptible quality of loyalty that Logan had thought about almost every day for 11 years. Not the way you thought about a ghost, the way you thought about a standard you were still trying to meet. The training center would carry his name. People Logan would never know, in situations he couldn't predict, would learn things in a building with Daniel Reyes' name on the door. Some of those people would use those things to help someone who needed help. The chain of it extended forward in time in a way that Logan couldn't see the end of. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was the kind of thing you didn't always get, and when you got it, you took a breath and acknowledged it and then kept moving, because that was also what Danny would have done. Logan took a breath. He kept moving. The months after that had the texture of ordinary life, which was the thing Logan had wanted and worked to build, and had almost lost, and had come back to with a new understanding of what it cost and what it was worth. He drove Maya to school. He made scrambled eggs with the correct amount of cheese. He helped her finish the migratory bird report, which was indeed comprehensive, and when she got it back with a note from her teacher saying it was the most detailed piece of work she'd seen from a second grader, he put it on the refrigerator and stood in front of it for a while with his coffee and felt something that didn't need a name. He worked with Natalie Pierce and 2 new security analysts on designing the framework for Apex's independent security division. The work was slow and detailed and involved a great deal of documentation, which suited him. He came in 2, sometimes 3 days a week. He was, technically, a consultant. He had a badge that identified him that way. Dale had looked at the badge the first time he saw it and said, "Consultant? What happened to maintenance?" And Logan had said, "I'm consulting on the maintenance of important things." And Dale had said, "That doesn't mean anything." And Logan had said, "Most important things don't." He and Evelyn saw each other in those 2 or 3 days a week in the way that people see each other when they're working on the same problem. Meetings, hallways, the coffee shop, 2 blocks from the building that had become a kind of neutral ground for conversations that needed to happen outside an office. They developed a register of interaction that was its own thing, direct, unceremonious, occasionally funny, in the dry way of 2 people who had been through something serious together and emerged with an accurate picture of who the other person was. It wasn't a fast thing, and it wasn't a linear thing, and there were weeks when they didn't see each other at all, and weeks when they talked every day. And Logan didn't try to categorize it or accelerate it because he had learned, at considerable personal cost over a period of years, that the things worth having didn't do well when you pushed at them. You showed up, you were honest, you let the other person be who they actually were rather than who it would be convenient for them to be. Everything else moved at its own speed. In June, on a Saturday, He took Maya to the Natural History Museum because she had entered a phase of intense interest in the migratory patterns of prehistoric birds and wanted to see the fossil record firsthand. They spent 4 hours there, moving through the exhibits at the specific pace of a child who had research questions, which was slower than the pace of a child who was simply interested and faster than the pace of a child who was bored. Evelyn met them for lunch at the museum cafe. This had been Maya's suggestion, which Logan had communicated to Evelyn with the specific, careful neutrality of a man who was not going to editorialize on his 7-year-old's social calendar. Maya spent the first 10 minutes of lunch explaining the evolution of avian bone structure to Evelyn with the focused enthusiasm of someone who had prepared material. Evelyn listened, really listened, the way she always listened, 2 processes running at once, the full attention and the separate assessment, and asked questions that were genuine rather than politely prompting. And at some point, Maya looked at her and said, "You actually want to know about this?" And Evelyn said, "I genuinely do." And Maya said, "Okay, good, because most adults pretend." And Evelyn said, "Most adults should stop pretending." And Maya considered this and said, "I agree." And something settled between the 3 of them at the cafe table that had the quality of an understanding reached without being negotiated. Logan ate his sandwich and didn't say much, and thought that if you'd told him 14 months ago that his life would arrive at a Saturday afternoon in a museum cafe with his daughter explaining prehistoric birds to the CEO, he'd pulled out of a warehouse on a night bus. Well, he would have filed that in the category of outcomes too specific to anticipate. He didn't say any of this. He ate his sandwich, he listened to Maya talk. He looked at Evelyn across the table once, and she was already looking at him, and they both looked away in the same moment, which was its own kind of conversation. On the walk back to the car, Maya between them, her hand in Logan's, she said, "Dad, is Evelyn your friend?" "Yes," he said. "A good friend?" He thought about this, about hallways and bus seats and coffee shops, and the particular honesty that had developed between them, like a structure that neither of them had planned, but both of them had built. "Yeah," he said. "A good friend." Maya seemed to consider whether this answer was complete. Then she looked up at Evelyn. "He doesn't have a lot of friends," she said, in the conversational tone of someone sharing information that she considered relevant. "He's kind of serious all the time." "I've noticed," Evelyn said. "But he's actually funny sometimes," Maya said. "Just slow." "The good kind of funny usually is," Evelyn said. Maya appeared satisfied with this assessment and returned her attention to the sidewalk and the question of whether the pizza place on the corner was the same one they'd been to with Aunt Rachel, which it wasn't, but the investigation was ongoing. Logan walked beside them in the June afternoon, the city doing its city things around them, the ordinary world continuing in the ordinary way that it did, and he thought about what it meant to be a person who had walked through something difficult and come back to something real. He didn't think it made him extraordinary. He thought it made him someone who had been paying attention at the right moments and had been willing to act on what he saw, even when acting cost him something. That wasn't heroism. It was just a decision, made over and over. In a service corridor, in a hotel hallway, on a night bus, in a lawyer's office, at a kitchen table with a 7-year-old who saw him more clearly than most adults had the patience for. The decision was always the same one. Show up, tell the truth, don't leave anyone behind, take care of the people in front of you. It was not a complicated code. It was the one his life had assembled for him through a series of experiences he hadn't chosen, and it was the one he'd chosen to keep even when he'd had the chance to put it down. He'd thought, for a long time, that choosing to keep it was the same as not being free. He'd spent 4 years in a sub-basement with a toolbox thinking that the quiet was its own kind of freedom. He'd been wrong about that, not about the quiet. The quiet was real, and he still needed it, but about what it meant to be free. Freedom wasn't the absence of the person you were. It was figuring out how to let that person exist in a life that also had room for scrambled eggs and purple horses and Saturday afternoons and someone across a cafe table who asked genuine questions and looked at him like she was still figuring out what she was looking at and was in no particular hurry to stop. That was the life. That was it. Exactly. Maya found a pigeon on the sidewalk that she was convinced was disoriented and spent several minutes assessing its navigational status before concluding it was fine and just looking for food, which Logan took as confirmation that the Migratory Bird Project had genuinely altered how his daughter moved through the world, which was either wonderful or he would be hearing about bird navigation for the next 10 years. Probably both. Evelyn caught his eye over Maya's head, and the expression on her face was the one he'd come to know. The one that wasn't quite a smile, but was something adjacent to it, something that lived in the space between amusement and something warmer and more considered. He held it for a moment, that look. Let it be what it was. Then Maya stood up from her investigation of the pigeon and announced she was hungry, and the matter of lunch was apparently already forgotten, which was the particular amnesia of small children with large appetites. And they walked together down the Chicago street in the June afternoon, the former Navy SEAL and the billionaire CEO, and the 7-year-old ornithologist, ordinary and improbable and real, and the city went on around them as cities do. Indifferent to the details, but large enough, always, to hold the full weight of whatever people brought to it. Logan Mercer carried no weight that day. Or he carried the usual weight, the one that had been with him for 11 years. But he carried it differently now. Not as a thing that kept him from moving forward, but as something he'd made room for, settled into its proper place alongside everything else. The grief, and the discipline and the love for a small girl who talked to pigeons, and the slow, careful thing that was building with a woman who met him honestly and didn't look away. It was not a perfect life. It was not supposed to be. The cracked rib had healed crooked, which his doctor said was not a problem, but which caught him sometimes when he turned a certain way. The sealed review would stay sealed. Danny Reyes would stay gone. There were 2 people in the world who knew the full version of Logan Mercer, and both of them had his phone number, and that was probably the right number. He had his daughter. He had work that meant something. He had a future that was being built rather than maintained. That was enough. That had always been enough. He just needed the right sequence of events to make it visible. Down the block, Maya had moved on from the pigeon and was explaining something about electromagnetic navigation to Evelyn. Using her hands the way she used her hands when the topic required full physical commitment. Evelyn was listening. The afternoon light came down through the buildings the way it did in Chicago in June, horizontal and golden, and it caught the street and the people on it and made everything briefly, unearned, beautiful. Logan Mercer walked toward his daughter and kept his eyes open and paid attention, which was the only thing he'd ever really known how to do, and which had always been, when everything else was stripped away, exactly enough.